lay immobilized beneath the stark, unforgiving glare of the surgical ward's fluorescent lights, my chest encased in rigid fiberglass braces and my forearms tethered to a labyrinth of humming IV pumps. I had barely survived a catastrophic collision on Interstate 90 that left my vehicle an unrecognizable monument of twisted steel. The steady, rhythmic beeping of the cardiac monitor provided the only anchor to reality when my estranged mother, Brenda, breezed past the restricted access signs. This was a woman who had intentionally erased me from her existence over 5 long years. Yet here she was, standing over my mattress, stroking my bruised forehead with a calculated, chilling tenderness, while instructing a shark-eyed attorney named Todd to expedite a permanent, non-revocable conservatorship. She casually smoothed out the glossy legal petitions across my blanket, orchestrating a deliberate, bloodless coup designed to seize dictatorial control over my identity and siphon away every cent of my $2 million insurance settlement. She looked down at my motionless body, believing I was reduced to a silent, hollow shell, incapable of defending my own future. What Brenda and her eager legal accomplice did not know was that beneath the thin, scratchy fabric of the hospital blanket, I was entirely awake. My name is Maya. I am a 30-year-old independent data analyst who built a stable, transparent life from the ground up, and I never surrender my hard-earned peace to a parasite. Before I reveal exactly how this nightmare unfolded, drop a quick comment below, sharing your age and the city you are watching from today. Please hit the like button and subscribe to Sweet Life Drama if you have ever been forced to build a fortress of boundaries to protect yourself from toxic blood relatives. Stay right here because you are going to want to hear every single detail of what happened next in room 314. The heavy wooden door of room 314 clicked shut behind Todd the attorney. The secondary latch engaged with a metallic snap. The instant the sound echoed off the sterile walls, the temperature in the room seemed to plummet. Brenda exhaled a long breath and dropped the facade. The weeping, devoted mother vanished. She rolled her shoulders back and walked over to the vital signs monitor, her eyes scanning the digital numbers, not with the anxiety of a parent, but with the cold appraisal of an accountant reviewing a ledger. I kept my breathing shallow. 12 breaths per minute. The number sounds clinical and easy, but executing it while my own mother stood 3 feet away, orchestrating my erasure, felt like swallowing broken glass. A hot, sickening wave of panic clawed at the back of my throat, threatening to push a scream past my lips. My eyelids remained shut, leaving only a microscopic sliver of light to track her movements. The fiberglass braces encasing my ribs made every inhalation a calculated physical effort. But the sharpest agony was the crushing weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest. I dug my fingernails into the flesh of my own thigh beneath the scratchy blanket, using the localized physical pain to ground my mind and force the rising hysteria back down into my stomach. Footsteps sounded in the corridor, rubber soles squeaking against polished linoleum. A private duty nurse stepped into the room, holding a fresh IV bag and a medical chart. She had kind eyes and a badge that read Jenkins. "I need to check her vitals and rotate her position," Nurse Jenkins said, keeping her voice to a professional murmur. Brenda pivoted. She intercepted the nurse before she could reach the foot of my bed. "That won't be necessary," Brenda said. Nurse Jenkins blinked, looking at her clipboard. "Ma'am, her chart indicates standard rotation to prevent pressure ulcers. I also need to verify her cognitive responsiveness." Brenda stepped into the nurse's personal space. She did not raise her voice. She used the precise hushed tone of a woman claiming undisputed territory. "My daughter suffered catastrophic trauma. The neurologist said any stimulation could trigger a seizure. She needs absolute, uncompromised silence. I am her biological mother and her next of kin. I am dismissing you for the afternoon. I will sit with her. No visitors. No hospital staff unless the monitors sound an alarm." "I have to document this refusal of care," the nurse replied, her tone stiffening. "Document whatever you like," Brenda countered, pulling a plastic guest chair directly against the side of my bed, placing herself as a physical barricade between me and the door. "But close the door on your way out." The nurse hesitated, glancing at my motionless form. I wanted to open my eyes. I wanted to tell the nurse to call security. I stayed perfectly still. The door swung shut. The isolation was now total. Brenda had successfully severed my immediate connection to the hospital staff. She reached into her oversized leather handbag. The bag was a designer knockoff, frayed at the handles, a perfect physical manifestation of Brenda's entire existence. She craved the aesthetic of wealth without possessing the discipline to earn it. Since the day I packed my bags on my 18th birthday and walked out of her house, I had built my life on data and financial transparency. I ran my own analytics firm, tracking market trends and consumer behaviors. My ledgers were flawless. My savings accounts were diversified. Brenda lived in a perpetual cycle of maxed-out credit limits and final notices. She spent money she did not have to impress neighbors she did not even like. I knew she was drowning in IRS penalties. I knew her house was inches away from foreclosure. That $2 million insurance settlement was not just money to her. It was a golden parachute. Beneath the scratchy hospital blanket, the smartphone tucked under my right thigh vibrated, a single short pulse. My heart hammered against the fiberglass brace. Brenda was sitting less than 3 feet away. She pulled a nail file from her purse and began smoothing the edge of her thumb. The abrasive rasping sound filled the quiet room. I waited for her to look away. She shifted in the plastic chair, turning her head toward the window to watch the afternoon traffic on Interstate 90. I moved my right hand. The IV line taped to the back of my hand pulled tight, sending a sharp bite of pain up my forearm. I ignored it. I slid my fingers inch by inch under my thigh. I found the phone. The screen was warm against my skin. Muscle memory took over. I knew the exact layout of my home screen. I pressed the side button to wake the device, keeping it buried deep under the thick fabric to hide the backlight. Swipe up. Face ID would fail because of the angle. I tapped my 6-digit passcode blindly. Open the messaging app. Top thread. The message was from Chloe. Chloe married my older brother David 4 years ago. She is a Black woman with a mind like a steel trap and zero tolerance for familial nonsense. As a senior auditor for a major corporate accounting firm, Chloe views panic as a math error. She dismantles problems by following the paper trail. We shared a mutual understanding that Brenda was toxic and David was too passive to stop her. I felt the screen with my thumb, navigating to the voice memos app. I found the recording I had just captured of Brenda and Todd the lawyer. I hit share, selected Chloe's contact, pressed send. The progress bar would take seconds to complete over the hospital's cellular network. Brenda stopped filing her nails. The rasping sound ceased. "You always were a stubborn little thing," Brenda murmured, talking to my supposedly damaged brain. "Always thought you were smarter than everyone else. We will see how smart you are when you cannot even sign your own name." The phone gave a microscopic haptic click. The audio file had delivered. I slid my hand back to my side, letting the blanket drape naturally over my hip. I counted the seconds in my head. 100. 200. Giving Chloe time to listen to the 12-minute recording. The phone vibrated twice, a rapid double pulse. I waited for Brenda to stand up. She stood across the room to throw her emery board into the trash can near the sink and turn on the faucet to wash her hands. I slipped the phone out, just enough to catch the edge of the screen. Chloe's first text. Audio secured, uploaded to 3 separate encrypted cloud drives. Todd the lawyer is a fool for speaking on record. Chloe's second text. Maya, do not react to what I am about to tell you. I read the words and a terrifying physical coldness washed over my entire body. It was not just the shock of a frozen bank account. It was the intimate, brutal reality that the woman who gave birth to me was actively suffocating me. My pulse spiked wildly, causing the green line on the cardiac monitor to jump into erratic peaks. The machine emitted a rapid, piercing warning chime. Brenda turned off the water and glanced at the screen. I closed my eyes and fought a violent internal war. Every instinct in my human biology screamed at me to sit up, to cry, to demand an explanation. Hot, aggressive tears burned behind my closed eyelids. I swallowed hard, fighting the thick lump in my throat. I squeezed my left hand into a tight fist under the covers until my knuckles ached, using every ounce of sheer willpower to cage the terrified child inside me so the analyst could survive. I visualized a metronome, but the ticking sound in my head was nearly drowned out by the pounding of my own terrified heart. Slowly, agonizingly, the green line stabilized. Brenda dried her hands and sat back down, losing interest. I checked the phone again. Chloe's third text. Brenda didn't just bring a lawyer to your room. She went to your bank branch this morning before she came to the hospital. She presented a medical power of attorney. It has your signature on it. It is backdated to last month. My lungs burned against the brace. A medical power of attorney. A legal instrument granting her total control over my healthcare and financial decisions in the event of incapacitation. I never signed such a document. I refused to even list her as an emergency contact on my intake forms. Chloe's fourth text delivered the killing blow. She used the forged document to hijack your personal checking and savings accounts. I ran a check through a contact at the branch. She seized total control. She withdrew $15,000 in cash this morning and wired another $5,000 out. Your autopay for your apartment lease will bounce in 3 days because your primary account is completely drained. I stared at the glowing letters in the dark tunnel beneath the blanket. The sheer audacity of the strike left a metallic taste in my mouth. This was the second layer of the conflict. Brenda was not merely setting up a future trap for the insurance payout. She was actively dismantling my present defenses. By freezing my accounts, she achieved 2 critical objectives simultaneously. First, she established a paper trail of her acting as my legal guardian, further strengthening her upcoming court petition for the permanent conservatorship. Second, and far more lethally, she cut off my oxygen supply. Legal defense requires retainers. High-powered attorneys require money up front. Brenda knew my financial independence was my greatest weapon, so she disarmed me before I even knew the battle had begun. Without access to my own funds, I could not hire a lawyer to contest the conservatorship hearing. I was trapped in a hospital bed with a functioning brain and zero financial mobility. The phone buzzed one last time. She is building a cage, Maya. She wants you penniless, so you default to her care. I am pulling her tax records now to see how desperate she really is. Stay down. Do not let her know you are awake. I locked the screen. I pushed the device deep into the mattress folds. Brenda leaned over the bed. I could smell her perfume, heavy and cloying, masking the scent of stale coffee. She adjusted the blanket near my chest, not to warm me, but to ensure the wires connecting to the monitors were untangled. She wanted the illusion of care maintained for any doctor who might walk past the glass partition. Just sleep, Maya, Brenda whispered, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. Mommy is taking care of everything. You do not have to worry about your bank accounts or your bills anymore. I have it all under control. She patted my shoulder. The physical contact sent a jolt of revulsion straight to my core. The walls of the room felt like they were shrinking, pressing inward. The trap was set, the accounts were frozen, and the clock was ticking down to a court hearing I could not afford to fight. The afternoon sunlight faded into a bruised purple dusk beyond the hospital window, casting long shadows across the sterile linoleum floor. Brenda returned to the room at exactly 6 o'clock. She did not bring food, and she did not bring flowers. She carried a stiff leather portfolio tucked under her arm and a small, square plastic casing in her palm. The weeping, devoted mother routine she had performed for the attorney earlier was entirely absent. Her movements were sharp, efficient, and driven by a cold sense of purpose. I recognized the embossed seal on the thick parchment she pulled from the portfolio. It was a durable power of attorney for property and financial management. This document went far beyond the medical freeze she had executed at the bank that morning. This specific legal instrument was designed to grant her unilateral authority to sell real estate, liquidate retirement portfolios, and endorse high-value insurance settlement checks. She popped open the plastic casing. The sharp chemical scent of fresh ink cut through the smell of hospital antiseptic. It was a red fingerprint pad. Since my hands were supposedly paralyzed by neurological trauma, a thumbprint witnessed by her own signature would serve as a legally binding endorsement in a probate court. Brenda leaned over the metal bed rails. She reached for my right hand. The medical tape securing the intravenous needle pulled taut against my skin. Her fingers were ice cold against my wrist. She clamped her grip around my arm and pried my thumb outward, aiming it toward the red sponge. My pulse hammered against my ribs. The cardiac monitor beside the bed registered the sudden spike, the steady green line tightening into faster, jagged peaks. I kept my eyelids sealed, leaving only a microscopic sliver of vision to track her hand. I focused on the mechanical rhythm of the ventilator in the next room, forcing my chest to rise and fall at a deceptive 12 beats per minute. I waited until the red ink pad was a fraction of an inch from my skin. Then I triggered the reflex. I fired every muscle in my right arm simultaneously. My elbow jerked upward in a sudden kinetic spasm. My forearm slammed hard into Brenda's wrist. The blunt force knocked the ink pad from her grasp. It hit the edge of the metal bed frame, flipped through the air, and landed face down on the pristine white floor. The thick legal document crumpled under her elbow as she stumbled backward to avoid the spilling red stain. The heart monitor chimed a sharp warning tone due to my sudden physical agitation. Brenda swore through her teeth. She scrambled toward the sink, grabbed a handful of coarse paper towels from the dispenser, and dropped to her knees to scrub the blooming red stain before a nurse responded to the monitor alarm. While she scrubbed the floor with her back turned to my bed, I slipped my left hand beneath my thigh. The phone screen illuminated the dark folds of the blanket. 3 new messages from Chloe awaited me. Chloe did not deal in assumptions or guesswork. As a senior corporate auditor, she traced paper trails until they ended in concrete facts. Her first text contained a series of high-resolution screenshots from the county clerk's public registry. The second text delivered the exact mathematics of my mother's situation. Chloe had bypassed the standard firewalls and pulled the public tax liens attached to Brenda's Social Security number. The Internal Revenue Service had an active criminal investigation open against her for 4 years of fraudulent tax filings. The agency had already placed federal liens on her primary residence. Furthermore, Brenda carried 2 separate mortgage loans on that same property, and both loans were in severe default. The bank had filed a notice of foreclosure. The public auction date for her house was scheduled for the second Tuesday of next month. Total arrears stood at $150,000. The numbers painted a terrifying psychological profile on the glowing screen. Brenda was not acting out of simple greed. She was a trapped animal. The $2 million insurance payout for my accident was the only lifeline that could keep her out of federal prison for tax evasion and save her from living on the street. That level of desperation made her lethal. She would not stop at forging documents. She needed me permanently incapacitated to maintain control of the narrative and the funds. Chloe's final message outlined our counterstrike. She had compiled the forged medical paperwork from the bank, the audio file of Brenda bribing the lawyer, and the federal tax lien documents into a single encrypted dossier. I sent the entire file to Marcus Thorne. Chloe typed. Marcus Thorne had built his reputation in the American legal system by dismantling guardianship fraud rings and prosecuting medical abuse cases. He was a litigator who thrived in the deep, ruthless waters of probate court. He did not negotiate settlements, he destroyed fraudulent estates. Thorne reviewed the audio. Chloe's next message read, "He says we have one shot. If we go to the police right now, Brenda plays the grieving mother routine. She claims she signed the bank forms out of panic and confusion over your accident. She might get a misdemeanor charge. Thorne says we need her to swear under oath. We need her to present these forged documents to a judge on the official court record. That locks in felony perjury and criminal fraud at the state level, making it an immediate arrestable offense. Once she is in state custody, Thorne will forward the financial dossier to the IRS Criminal Division to trigger the federal tax evasion investigation. We let her build her own inescapable cage." I locked the phone and slid it back into its hiding place just as Brenda stood up. She tossed the red-stained paper towels into the biohazard bin. She smoothed the wrinkles out of the property document and placed it back into her leather portfolio, her jaw set in a tight, angry line. The fingerprint attempt had failed, but she would find another way to secure my authorization. The ward lights dimmed to a low amber for the night shift rotation. Brenda pulled her plastic guest chair directly against the bed rail. She leaned over me, her shadow blocking out the ambient light from the hallway corridor. She brought her lips inches from my ear. Her breath smelled stale, tinged with cheap mints and bitter coffee. "You always made everything so difficult," she whispered, her tone devoid of any maternal warmth, ringing with a hollow metallic edge. "But it does not matter anymore. Just lay there. Just play the fool. Mommy is going to take care of you, and Mommy is going to take care of everything you own." She settled back into her chair, crossing her arms, confident in her silent victory over a broken daughter. She closed her eyes, entirely unaware that a senior auditor and a relentless litigator were currently weaving her financial ruin, thread by thread, using the very paper trail she thought she had buried. The morning shift change at Riverside Hospital brought a new rotation of nurses and the sharp smell of industrial bleach. At exactly 6 in the morning, the heavy wooden door to room 314 opened. Chloe walked in. She wore a tailored beige trench coat and carried a white ceramic pot holding a purple Phalaenopsis orchid. She moved with the brisk, silent efficiency of a senior auditor who spent her life uncovering corporate theft. She knew Brenda was currently in the cafeteria downstairs, demanding fresh coffee. We had exactly 4 minutes. Chloe did not waste time with greetings. She set the ceramic pot on the rolling overbed table and pushed it to the far edge directly opposite my pillow. Her hands moved swiftly, burying my spare smartphone deep into the decorative green moss. She adjusted the broad leaves of the orchid to camouflage the black rectangular frame. The camera lens peeked through a narrow gap aimed dead center at the empty space between my mattress and the plastic visitor chair. "The battery is fully charged," Chloe whispered. Her voice barely registered above the steady, rhythmic hum of the ventilator in the next room. "It is set to record continuously to a secure cloud server." Thorne reviewed the bank documents. He says forged signatures are good, but a recorded financial transaction is a death blow. We need them to exchange money on camera. She squeezed my foot through the thick hospital blanket. She turned on her heel and exited the room exactly 30 seconds before Brenda returned. Brenda did not return alone. The man walking beside her did not belong in a trauma ward. He wore a tailored charcoal suit under an unbuttoned white lab coat that looked brand new. His leather shoes squeaked sharply against the polished linoleum floor. A heavy gold chronograph watch slipped from his cuff when he reached for the door handle. His identification badge read Dr. Sterling Private Practice. He did not introduce himself to the attending floor nurse who followed them inside. He simply turned around and told the nurse her services were no longer required for this patient. He closed the door and engaged the deadbolt. I maintained the shallow breathing pattern I had perfected overnight. My eyes remained fixed on the ceiling tiles. I let my jaw go slack. Sterling stood over me. He did not bother to pick up my medical chart hanging at the foot of the bed. He did not check my pulse or look at the cardiac monitor. He pulled a high-intensity penlight from his breast pocket and shined the beam directly into my left eye. The blinding white light burned my retina. I kept my gaze dead and unblinking. My eyes watered from the glare, but I forced the muscles in my face to remain relaxed. He clicked the light off. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy metal reflex hammer. He dropped it intentionally onto the hard tile floor. The loud metallic clatter echoed off the bare walls. I suppressed the primal human urge to flinch. I kept my fingers limp and still against the white sheets. "Severe cortical damage," Sterling said. His voice was smooth and practiced, the tone of a salesman rather than a healer. "There is no pupillary response to direct light. There is no acoustic startle reflex." The chief of neurology who evaluated her yesterday was overly optimistic. "Your daughter is in a persistent vegetative state. The brain trauma is permanent." Brenda pulled the plastic guest chair closer to the bed. She sat down, crossing her legs. The performance of the weeping mother vanished. The clinical negotiation began. "The probate court requires a licensed physician to sign the medical affidavit," Sterling said. He leaned against the windowsill, crossing his arms. I am putting my medical license at risk by overriding the chief of neurology and submitting an independent evaluation. The judge will scrutinize this document. If another doctor examines her before the hearing, my career is over. $10,000, Brenda said. Her voice was flat and cold. 15, Sterling countered without missing a beat. And I need $5,000 right now, in untraceable cash. You will pay the remaining $10,000 when the judge stamps your conservatorship order and releases the insurance funds. Brenda reached into her oversized leather handbag. She dug past her makeup bag and pulled out a thick brown paper envelope. She tossed it onto the metal tray table right next to the purple orchid. Sterling picked up the envelope. He opened the flap and pulled out a thick stack of $100 bills. He licked his thumb and began counting the money right there in my hospital room. The crisp friction of paper bills rubbing together filled the quiet space. The sound was methodical and sickening. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He counted to 50. He tapped the stack against the table to even the edges, folded the money in half, and slid it into his suit pocket. He took a silver pen from his coat. He signed the bottom of the medical affidavit with a flourish. He handed the clipboard to Brenda. "Submit this to your attorney immediately," Sterling said. "It certifies permanent and irreversible cognitive decline. It advises the court that the patient lacks the capacity to make medical or financial decisions. The court will not question a private specialist's sworn statement." Sterling walked out of the room without looking at me again. The heavy door clicked shut. I lay trapped beneath the scratchy hospital blankets. The urge to rise up, rip the intravenous needle from my arm, and wrap the plastic tubing around Brenda's throat pulled at every muscle in my body. I channeled that raging energy into my core, forcing my chest to rise and fall at a measured, tranquil pace. The purple orchid sat 3 feet away. Its hidden lens had just captured a licensed medical professional trading his solemn oath for a stack of stolen currency. The burning anger inside me morphed into a cold, silent focus. Todd the lawyer arrived at 2 in the afternoon. He smelled of cheap mints and stale tobacco. He opened his worn leather briefcase and laid a stack of legal petitions on the edge of my bed. The heavy weight of the paper rested against my shins. "I filed the emergency motion," Todd said. He tapped his pen against the documents. "I submitted Dr. Sterling's affidavit to the probate clerk an hour ago. The court reviewed the medical severity and accepted the expedited timeline." Brenda leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "When is the hearing?" "Friday morning," Todd answered. 9 o'clock sharp. Because the patient cannot be safely transported to the courthouse, the judge agreed to conduct a bedside hearing. He will arrive here with the court clerk and a bailiff. He will review the medical evidence. He will observe your daughter. Once he is satisfied with her lack of cognitive function, he will sign the final order granting you permanent conservatorship. You will have total control over her property, her bank accounts, and the $2 million insurance payout. Friday morning. I tracked the days in my mind. Today was Wednesday. I had less than 48 hours to finalize the trap. "What about the rest of the family?" Todd asked. He looked nervous. "If anyone contests your petition, the judge will delay the ruling to appoint an independent guardian ad litem. We cannot afford a delay." "Nobody will contest it," Brenda said. Her tone was sharp and triumphant. "I have invited everyone to the hospital for Friday morning. I told them we are holding a special prayer vigil for Maya. They will stand in this room and watch the judge hand me the legal rights. They will be my witnesses. They will see me stepping up as the devoted mother to carry this heavy burden." She wanted an audience. She needed the extended family to validate her fake grief and cement her control over my life. She was building a public stage for her own coronation. Todd packed his briefcase and snapped the brass latches shut. "Make sure she stays exactly like this," he said, pointing a thick finger at my face. "If she shows a single sign of awareness on Friday, the judge will throw the petition out and demand a new medical board evaluation." "She is not waking up," Brenda said. Todd left the room. Brenda stood up and walked to the side of my bed. She leaned over me until her face was inches from mine. She gripped my right arm. Her manicured fingernails dug deep into my bare skin, searching for a hidden pain response. I did not move. I let my arm lie heavy and dead in her grasp. She pinched the soft, sensitive skin on the inside of my wrist and twisted. The sharp, stinging pain radiated up to my elbow. I kept my face blank. I slowed my heart rate down, focusing on the steady green line tracing across the cardiac monitor. She released my wrist, leaving red half-moon marks on my skin. She patted my cheek with a cold hand. "Just 2 more days," Brenda whispered, her voice dripping with venom. "Then I own every piece of you." She walked to the window and looked out at the highway traffic. She had no idea the orchid on the table was still recording her every move. She had no idea Chloe was already downloading the high-definition footage of the cash bribe to a secure server. She had no idea she had just handed a relentless probate litigator the exact evidence needed to upgrade her family dispute into a federal fraud indictment. I closed my eyes, focused on the ticking clock, and waited for Friday. The pale morning light of Thursday crept through the narrow gaps in the hospital blinds, casting sharp horizontal shadows across the linoleum floor. The digital clock mounted above the door clicked to 7 in the morning. My phone delivered a single muted vibration against my thigh. I waited for the hallway outside to quiet down before sliding my hand beneath the heavy thermal blanket. The screen illuminated the dark space under the covers. Chloe had sent a secure, encrypted message thread detailing her early morning conference with Marcus Thorne. The text blocks were dense, precise, and stripped of all panic. "Thorne reviewed the footage from the hidden orchid camera," Chloe wrote. "The visual of Sterling accepting the cash envelope is clean. The audio of the transaction is indisputable, but Thorne insists we hold our position. Do not alert hospital security. Do not contact local law enforcement." I read the directive twice. The instinct to press the red call button taped to the bed rail, to summon the floor charge nurse and have Brenda escorted out in handcuffs, pulled at the muscles in my uninjured arm. "If we bring the local police into this room today," the next text read. Brenda controls the narrative. She plays the overwhelmed, grieving mother, acting out of sheer panic to secure her daughter's medical care. A sympathetic county prosecutor might view the forged bank mandate as a desperate familial misstep. They plea it down to a misdemeanor. She pays a fine. She walks away. The next message outlined the architecture of our trap. Thorne operates in high-level state jurisdictions. To secure an indictment that dismantles her permanently, we need her to cross the line from a family dispute into felony perjury and fraud. We need her to submit these forged documents to a sitting judge on the official court record. We need her to raise her right hand and swear under oath that you are in a vegetative state. We let her build her own cage. Your job is to stay entirely silent until the ink hits the judge's paper. I locked the device and pushed it back deep into the mattress seam just as the heavy wooden door handle turned. Brenda walked in carrying a cardboard coffee cup and a thick, rigid mailing envelope. She dropped her oversized purse onto the plastic guest chair and approached the rolling tray table. She smelled of cheap vanilla lotion and exhausted ambition. She did not check my vital signs. She did not look at my face. She unclasped the mailing envelope and slid out a stack of financial documents. I recognized the distinctive maroon logo on the top page from my peripheral vision. Vanguard. It was a formal hardship withdrawal authorization for my 401k retirement account. I had spent 6 years building that portfolio, contributing a strict 15% of every paycheck, denying myself vacations and luxury purchases to ensure my financial foundation was unbreakable. Brenda pulled a smartphone from her pocket and dialed a toll-free number. She placed the phone on speaker and set it next to the Vanguard documents. The automated voice of a banking system echoed in the quiet hospital room. "Please enter the Social Security number associated with your account," the robotic voice instructed. Brenda read my 9-digit Social Security number aloud without hesitation. She keyed the numbers in. She navigated the voice prompts, bypassing the security protocols using my mother's maiden name and the street address of my first childhood home. Answers she knew by default. "Your current account balance is The automated voice paused, generating the number. $312,480. To request an early distribution, press 3. Brenda pressed 3. A live representative picked up the line seconds later. Vanguard Distributions, this is Kevin. How can I help you today? Hi, Kevin. Brenda said, her tone sharp and authoritative. This is Brenda Townsend. I am calling regarding my daughter's account, Maya Townsend. She is currently incapacitated in the hospital, and I am preparing the paperwork for a full hardship withdrawal of her balance. I am sorry to hear that, ma'am, Kevin replied. However, for a full distribution of that size, Vanguard requires the account holder's signature to be authenticated by a medallion signature guarantee from a local bank officer. Brenda's jaw tightened, but her voice remained perfectly level. My daughter is in a coma, Kevin. She cannot visit a bank. I am receiving a permanent court-ordered conservatorship from a probate judge tomorrow morning. Will an official court-stamped decree bypass your medallion requirement? Yes, ma'am, Kevin confirmed. If you fax the withdrawal authorization forms accompanied by the judge's signed conservatorship order, our legal department will waive the medallion stamp and process the wire transfer immediately. I will fax the complete package tomorrow at 10, Brenda said. She wrote down the fax number on a hospital napkin and ended the call. She picked up a black gel pen and positioned the Vanguard document flat on the table. She leaned over the metal bed rail, placing her elbow inches from my ribs. She filled out the routing numbers for her own primary checking account. Then she looked down at my motionless hand and began to write. I listened to the sharp scratch of the pen tip against the heavy paper, the looping curve of the M, the sharp downward stroke of the Y. Even with the conservatorship loophole, she was still forging my signature on the primary applicant line to ensure the paperwork was ready to send the second the judge ruled in her favor. She was absorbing massive tax penalties to liquidate my life savings because she required the cash to satisfy her IRS debts. There, she whispered to herself, capping the pen. She folded the document and slipped it into her purse. The Friday hearing was no longer just a power grab. It was the master key she desperately needed to bypass the bank's security wall. The hours dragged into the afternoon. The rhythmic hiss of the ventilator next door marked the passage of time. My phone delivered a rapid double pulse at 2 o'clock. I retrieved it. Chloe had sent a high-resolution photograph. It was an image of a navy blue legal binder sitting on the dark oak surface of Marcus Thorne's conference table. The dossier is assembled and bound, Chloe typed. Tab 1. The IRS tax lien and notice of foreclosure on Brenda's property, proving financial desperation. Tab 2. The unauthorized medical power of attorney she filed at your bank branch, proving preemptive financial lockout. Tab 3. High-definition color stills from the Orchid camera, showing Dr. Sterling counting the cash bribe. Tab 4. The Vanguard phone log verification. Tab 5. A certified transcript of her audio recording with Todd the lawyer outlining the scheme. I stared at the image of the blue binder on my small screen. It represented the total destruction of my mother's future. It was a weapon forged entirely from her own greed. Thorne tracked the probate court docket, Chloe added. Judge Harrison is confirmed for the bedside hearing tomorrow at 9 sharp. Thorne will be in the hospital lobby by 8. I will be standing outside the stairwell door. Stay down. Brenda spent the rest of Thursday afternoon working her phone. She paced the length of the hospital room, her voice dialed into a precise pitch of fragile, manufactured sorrow. She called Aunt Sarah first. Sarah, the judge is coming tomorrow morning to finalize the permanent guardianship, Brenda said, pausing to let a calculated sob escape her throat. The specialist evaluated her again today. Her brain is gone. I need my family here. I need you to stand with me while I take on this burden. We are holding a small prayer vigil right here in the room at 8:30, just before the judge arrives. I could hear Aunt Sarah's voice through the receiver, thick with sympathy. Of course, Brenda, we wouldn't miss it. You are so strong for doing this. Brenda hung up and dialed Uncle John. Then she called 2 of my older cousins who had openly criticized me at family gatherings for being too independent and distant. She delivered the exact same script. She invited all of them to room 314 for Friday morning. She was not inviting them for spiritual support. She was assembling a jury. She knew her history of unpaid debts and financial ruin made her untrustworthy in the eyes of the family, so she needed their physical presence to legitimize her coup. If Aunt Sarah, Uncle John, and the cousins stood weeping around my hospital bed while the judge reviewed the paperwork, it would paint an unimpeachable picture of a united, grieving family. It would extinguish any lingering judicial doubt. It would make her untouchable. She ended her final call, slipped the phone into her pocket, and walked over to the window. The sky outside was turning a bruised, wintry gray. "They are all coming," she said to the empty room, looking down at the highway traffic. "Everyone is going to see me step up. Everyone is going to see what a real mother looks like." I kept my breathing shallow. The fiberglass brace dug into my ribs. The IV needle pinched the delicate vein in the back of my hand. I embraced the physical discomfort, letting it anchor my focus. I watched the digital clock on the wall shift to 5 in the evening. 16 hours remained. My accounts were frozen, my retirement was compromised, and my own family was currently picking out their somber church clothes to wear to my legal execution. I closed my eyes, focused on the steady green line tracing across the cardiac monitor, and waited for the sun to rise on Friday. The narrow hospital room was not designed to hold a crowd. By 8 in the morning, the air inside room 314 had already turned thick and warm, smelling of damp wool coats, stale coffee, and the sharp antiseptic tang of the linoleum floor. Through the microscopic gap in my eyelashes, I tracked the shadows moving across the white ceiling tiles. Aunt Sarah and Uncle John arrived first. Their boots squeaked against the polished floor. They had not spoken to me in 3 years, not since the day they chose to believe Brenda's fabricated story about me stealing from our grandmother's estate. Now they stood at the foot of my bed, offering hushed, reverent whispers. "She looks so frail," Aunt Sarah murmured. Her voice carried the specific practiced sorrow of someone who wants the room to know they are grieving. "It is a tragedy," Uncle John replied, shifting his weight. Keys jingled in his coat pocket. "Brenda has a heavy cross to bear." Brenda moved through the cramped space with the quiet grace of a veteran stage actor finding her marks. She had abandoned her usual bright blouses and heavy gold jewelry. Today she wore a dark charcoal sweater and a plain silver cross resting against her collarbone. Her hair was pulled back into a simple, severe knot, framing a face devoid of makeup except for the subtle dark shading she had applied under her eyes to simulate weeks of sleepless devotion. She intercepted Aunt Sarah before my aunt could reach the side of the bed. Brenda placed a gentle hand on Sarah's arm, effectively blocking her path and maintaining strict physical control over my immediate radius. "The neurologist warned us about sudden stimulation," Brenda whispered. "We just need to stand vigil. The judge will be here soon." By 8:30, 2 of my older cousins had filed into the room, taking up positions against the back wall near the sink. The physical pressure of their presence pressed against my ribs. I maintained my shallow 12-beat-per-minute breathing cycle. I focused on the green line, tracing its repetitive path across the cardiac monitor. My right arm lay heavy and motionless, the intravenous needle taped securely to the back of my hand. My phone remained buried deep within the mattress seam beneath my hip. Chloe was currently standing in the stairwell 50 feet away, waiting for the signal. Marcus Thorne, the probate litigator, was sitting in the main lobby downstairs. At exactly 8:58, the heavy wooden door swung open. The casual murmurs among the relatives ceased instantly. The atmosphere in the room crystallized, snapping into sharp, rigid focus. Judge Harrison walked in. He did not wear judicial robes, opting instead for a tailored navy suit that carried the same undeniable weight of state authority. He was a man in his late 50s, his face lined with the fatigue of a crowded probate docket. A court clerk followed close behind him, pushing a small folding cart stacked with manila folders. The most crucial arrival was the third person to enter the room. A uniformed county bailiff stepped through the doorway, his duty belt creaking faintly. He closed the heavy door, engaged the deadbolt, and took a stationary position against the wall, crossing his arms. Brenda's trap was now populated with sworn officers of the court. Good morning, Judge Harrison said. His baritone voice resonated off the bare walls, stripping away the hospital setting and transforming room 314 into a legal chamber. We are here on an expedited motion for the appointment of a permanent conservator for the person and estate of Maya Townsend, docket number 4827. The clerk placed a digital dictaphone on the rolling overbed table and pressed a red button. A small LED light illuminated, signaling that every word spoken from this moment forward was an official matter of public record. Judge Harrison looked around the crowded room, his gaze resting on Aunt Sarah and Uncle John. I note the presence of extended family members. Mrs. Townsend, are these individuals here in support of your petition? Brenda stepped forward, smoothing the front of her charcoal sweater. Yes, Your Honor. We believe in keeping family together during a crisis. Very well. Judge Harrison opened the thick file on the cart. He flipped through the first few pages. Before we review the medical affidavits, I must place you under oath. Please raise your right hand. I felt the mattress shift slightly as Brenda stepped closer to the bed frame to ensure she was the central figure in the room. I listened to the rustle of her wool sleeve as she raised her hand. Do you swear that the testimony you are about to give and the documents you have submitted to this court are the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury? I do, Brenda said. Her voice was firm, unwavering, carrying an edge of maternal resilience. The steel jaws of the federal trap snapped shut. By affirming that oath, the forged Vanguard withdrawal forms, the fraudulent bank mandate, and the bribed medical evaluation transformed from a localized family deception into a cascade of felony indictments. The court has reviewed the emergency affidavit submitted by Dr. Sterling, Judge Harrison continued, reading from the document Brenda had purchased for $15,000. The medical consensus presented here indicates permanent, irreversible cortical damage. The patient is described as existing in a persistent vegetative state, lacking all capacity to govern her physical or financial affairs. He looked up from the file and directed his attention to my motionless form on the bed. He studied my face for a long moment. I did not blink. I kept my jaw slack, my eyes tracking nothing but the shadows on the ceiling tiles. Given the severity of the prognosis, the judge said, returning to the paperwork, the petitioner seeks plenary power. This grants unilateral authority over the ward's healthcare directives, real estate holdings, retirement portfolios, and the pending $2 million casualty insurance settlement. A low collective breath escaped from the relatives standing against the wall. The sheer scale of the financial figure hung in the humid air. They had come to support a grieving mother. They were now realizing the magnitude of the empire Brenda was about to inherit. Mrs. Townsend, Judge Harrison said, his tone shifting from procedural to direct inquiry. Are you prepared to assume full fiduciary responsibility for these assets, utilizing them solely for the care and maintenance of your daughter? Brenda knelt beside the metal bed rails. She reached out and wrapped both of her hands around my uninjured left forearm. Her skin was damp with nervous sweat. She rested her chin near my shoulder, positioning herself so the judge and the family had a clear, unobstructed view of her grief. Maya is my everything, Brenda said, her voice dropping to a raw, ragged whisper that filled the silent room. She squeezed my arm. She is just like a child now. I brought her into this world, and I will use whatever time I have left on this earth to protect her. I will spend the rest of my life taking care of her. Aunt Sarah let out a muffled sob and pressed a tissue to her nose. Uncle John dropped his gaze to the floor, shaking his head in solemn admiration. The performance was flawless. It was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation executed on a stage built entirely from stolen autonomy. Judge Harrison nodded slowly. He closed the manila folder. He reached inside the breast pocket of his suit jacket and withdrew a heavy silver fountain pen. The court finds the medical evidence sufficient, Judge Harrison announced. Given the unanimous support of the present family and the lack of any contesting parties, I am granting the petition for permanent conservatorship. He pulled the final decree from the top of the stack and laid it flat on the rolling table. He held the silver pen in his right hand. I listened to the sharp metallic scrape of the pen cap unscrewing. The sound cut through the silence of the room. The judge lowered his hand. The nib of the pen hovered a fraction of an inch above the signature line. One stroke of black ink. That was the remaining distance between Brenda and total, undisputed control over my existence. The digital clock on the wall clicked to 9:15. The green line on my cardiac monitor pulsed. I stopped the metronome in my head. I took a deep, full breath, expanding my lungs against the fiberglass brace. I opened my eyes. The silver nib of Judge Harrison's pen hovered a fraction of an inch above the signature line on the permanent conservatorship decree. I did not wait for the ink to touch the paper. I opened my eyes. The ceiling tiles came into sharp focus. The fluorescent light burned my retinas, but I did not blink. I pushed my left hand flat against the mattress for leverage and engaged my core. The fiberglass brace digging into my ribs made the movement stiff and unnatural, but I forced my torso upward until I was sitting vertically against the pillows. A sound escaped Aunt Sarah near the foot of the bed, a short, ragged intake of air that caught in her throat. Uncle John took a sudden step backward, and his shoulder collided with the metal supply cart. The loose instruments rattled against the steel tray. I reached across my chest with my left hand and gripped the medical tape securing the intravenous line to my right wrist. I peeled the adhesive back in one swift, fluid motion. The sound of tearing tape cut through the heavy silence of the room. I pulled the needle free from the vein. A single bead of dark blood welled on my skin. I pressed my thumb against it and let my arm drop to my lap. The cardiac monitor maintained its steady green rhythm. I looked at Brenda. She was still kneeling beside the bed frame. Her hands were frozen in midair, reaching for an arm that was no longer there. The dark shading she had applied under her eyes to simulate exhaustion stood out against skin that had just turned the color of old chalk. Her mouth was open. Her vocal cords worked, but no sound emerged. I kept my voice low. My throat felt dry from days of disuse, but the words came out sharp and distinct. Thank you for your concern, Mother. I held her gaze, refusing to let her look away. But I think my brain remained sharp enough to manage my own $2 million. Brenda stumbled backward. The heel of her boot caught the leg of the plastic guest chair. The chair tipped sideways and crashed onto the hard linoleum floor. She hit the wall near the window and stayed there, pressing her palms flat against the painted plaster as if trying to push herself through the drywall. Todd, the lawyer, dropped his briefcase and hit the floor with a heavy thud. The brass latches popped open, spilling a dozen blank legal petitions across the white tiles. The heavy wooden door of the hospital room swung inward. Chloe walked in. She wore a tailored charcoal blazer and carried a thick navy blue binder under her left arm. In her right hand, she held a small black cylindrical speaker. She moved past Uncle John without acknowledging him and set the speaker on the edge of the rolling tray table right next to the judge's paperwork. She pressed a button on the side of the cylinder. A sharp electronic chime indicated the device was searching for a signal. I slid my left hand beneath the blanket and retrieved my phone. My thumb swiped the screen. I tapped the Bluetooth icon. The speaker chimed again, confirming the connection. I opened the encrypted drive folder Chloe had built. I selected the master audio file and pressed play. The voices echoed off the bare hospital walls. The audio was crisp and undeniable. Todd's voice filled the room first. He filed the emergency motion. I submitted Dr. Sterling's affidavit to the probate clerk an hour ago. The court reviewed the medical severity and accepted the expedited timeline. I watched the faces of my family. Aunt Sarah stared at the speaker, her hand covering her mouth. The two older cousins near the sink stopped leaning against the wall and stood rigid, their eyes darting between the speaker and Brenda. Then Brenda's voice echoed from the small black cylinder. Nobody will contest it. I've invited everyone to the hospital for Friday morning. I told them we are holding a special prayer vigil for Maya. They will stand in this room and watch the judge hand me the legal rights. They will be my witnesses. Aunt Sarah turned her head slowly and looked at Brenda. The manufactured sorrow in my aunt's eyes vanished, replaced by a hard, cold realization. She was not invited to a prayer vigil. She was summoned to serve as an unwitting shield for a financial coup. The audio continued, the sharp rustling sound of paper being shuffled, Dr. Sterling's voice crisp and clinical. The probate court requires a licensed physician to sign the medical affidavit. I am putting my medical license at risk. Brenda's voice flat and transactional. $10,000. 15, Sterling countered without missing a beat. And I need 5,000 right now, in untraceable cash. The sound of thick paper bills rubbing together filled the silence of room 314. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The methodical counting of stolen currency paying for a fraudulent diagnosis. I pressed the screen, and the recording stopped. The sudden absence of noise left a ringing sensation in the air. Chloe stepped forward. She dropped the navy blue binder onto the overbed table right on top of the conservatorship petition. The heavy weight of the binder pinned the fraudulent document to the table. She looked directly at Brenda and then at the judge. "This is the Internal Revenue Service dossier," Chloe said, her tone respectful to the court but unyielding toward my mother. "It confirms Brenda Townsend owes $150,000 in back taxes and default mortgages. Tab 2 contains the unauthorized medical power of attorney she filed at a local bank branch yesterday morning, utilizing a forged signature to freeze the patient's personal assets." The court clerk standing behind the judge reached out and pressed the red button on the dictaphone. He did not turn it off. He ensured it was still recording every breath, every movement, every piece of evidence being presented in the room. Judge Harrison did not look at Chloe. He stared at the blue binder. He slowly twisted the silver cap back onto his fountain pen. The click of the cap locking into place sounded like a steel door shutting. He picked up the medical affidavit Brenda had submitted. He read the signature at the bottom. He looked at the bank documents protruding from the blue binder. Then he turned his head and looked at my mother. The judicial fatigue in his face had burned away. The man standing at the foot of my bed was no longer a probate judge managing a crowded docket. He was an officer of the state, staring at a witness who had just committed felony perjury in his presence. "Mrs. Townsend," the judge said. His voice was low, resonant, and carried the full weight of the state. "You stood before this court 3 minutes ago. You raised your right hand. You swore an oath under penalty of perjury that the testimony and documents you provided were the truth." Brenda shook her head. Her hands remained pressed flat against the wall. She looked at Aunt Sarah, seeking a lifeline, seeking the familial solidarity she had relied on for decades. Sarah took 2 steps backward, creating a physical distance between herself and her sister. Uncle John looked at the floor, refusing to make eye contact. The cousins turned their shoulders toward the door. The family Brenda had gathered to legitimize her theft had just become the jury witnessing her destruction. "I was just trying to help her," Brenda whispered. Her voice was thin, devoid of the maternal authority she had wielded all week. "She needs me." Judge Harrison dropped the forged affidavit onto the table. "You submitted a fraudulent medical evaluation to a sitting judge," he said, his voice vibrating with absolute authority. "You swore an oath on a fabricated narrative to manipulate a judicial proceeding. I am holding you in direct criminal contempt of this court and ordering your immediate detention for perjury." He turned to the uniformed county bailiff standing near the door. The bailiff uncrossed his arms. He let his right hand drop to his utility belt, resting his palm against the steel cuffs hooked to his leather strap. He stepped away from the door and moved toward the center of the room, blocking the only exit. Todd the lawyer remained frozen, staring at the spilled paperwork on the floor. He slowly raised his hands, showing his empty palms to the bailiff, signaling his immediate and unconditional surrender. Judge Harrison pointed directly at Brenda. "Take her into custody for contempt and perjury," he instructed the bailiff. "And ensure the state detectives in the lobby receive this entire dossier to process the wire fraud charges immediately." I sat against the pillows, watching the architecture of my mother's trap collapse inward. I did not shout. I let the sheer gravity of the legal machinery she had invoked crush her. She had built a cage designed to hold me, and she had just handed the judge the lock and the key. The officer moved with the practiced efficiency of a man who managed desperate people for a living. He simply stepped behind Brenda, took hold of her right wrist, and pulled it firmly behind her back. The sharp metallic click of the steel cuffs ratcheting shut echoed off the hard hospital walls. Brenda's knees buckled. She did not hit the linoleum floor, only because the bailiff held her upright, his grip professional and unyielding. Her dark charcoal sweater, the costume she had chosen to perform the role of a grieving, exhausted caretaker, twisted awkwardly around her shoulders. "Maya!" Brenda gasped. Her voice was raw, stripped of the melodic, suffering cadence she used for family gatherings. "Tell them to stop! Please! I am your mother!" I sat against the pillows and watched her. My heart rate on the monitor remained a steady, tranquil green line. I did not blink. I did not speak. I let the heavy silence in the room serve as my response. Near the door, Todd realized his window for escape was closing. He tried to run without moving his legs. He attempted to erase his physical presence, sliding his expensive leather shoes backward inch by inch toward the heavy wooden door, leaving his spilled briefcase and scattered legal petitions on the floor. He reached his hands behind his back, his fingers grasping blindly for the brass handle. A hand clamped over the deadbolt. Marcus Thorne stepped into the doorway, blocking the only exit. The probate litigator did not look angry. He looked like a predator who had successfully cornered his prey. Thorne reached into the inside pocket of his tailored suit jacket and withdrew a thick manila envelope, handing it directly to the bailiff. "It contains the unedited audio files, the forged bank mandates, and the bribery footage." Thorne set his voice low and carrying the weight of a stone dropping into a quiet well. "State detectives are waiting in the lobby to process the felony fraud and perjury arrest." Thorne then turned his cold gaze to Todd. "I also took the liberty of faxing a copy to the State Bar Association this morning, Todd. Your emergency suspension is pending, and the IRS is being notified of your client's financial maneuvers. You will be disbarred before you even make bail." Todd's shoulders collapsed. The cheap mint scent he carried seemed to sour in the stagnant air of the room. He stared at the document, his lips moving silently over the printed charges, watching his entire career evaporate in real time. He turned without another word, pulling the door open and stepping out into the hallway to surrender to the waiting officers. Through the rectangular glass window set into the hospital door, movement caught my attention. 2 uniformed hospital security guards flanked Dr. Sterling. They marched the private physician down the corridor. His crisp white lab coat was unbuttoned, his designer tie skewed to the side. He held his wrists together in front of his belt, a dark jacket draped awkwardly over his hands to hide the handcuffs from passing nurses and patients. It was a final, desperate attempt to preserve his dignity. He did not look into room 314 as he passed. The $15,000 cash bribe had purchased him a fast track to a federal penitentiary and the permanent revocation of his medical license. Inside the room, the remaining audience stood paralyzed. The family members Brenda had summoned to witness her legal victory were now trapped inside the blast radius of her destruction. The illusion of family unity hung in the air, fragile and fracturing under the weight of the felony charges. Aunt Sarah found her voice. She stepped forward, her hands shaking, her eyes darting frantically between the bailiff, the judge, and my bed. "Your Honor," Sarah stammered, her voice pitched high with rising panic. "Please, this is a misunderstanding. Brenda made a mistake. She was just terrified for her daughter's health. She acted out of love. You cannot send a mother to jail for loving her child too much." Chloe moved. My sister-in-law did not sigh or roll her eyes at the performance. She simply flipped open the heavy cover of the navy blue binder resting on the overbed tray table. The crisp sound of thick paper turning cut through Sarah's pleading. Chloe traced her index finger down a printed bank ledger, her manicured nail stopping precisely halfway down the page. "Sarah," Chloe said. She did not use the title aunt. The familiar, affectionate titles had expired the moment these people stood around my bed waiting for me to be legally erased. Sarah froze mid-sentence. 2 days ago, Chloe continued, her tone conversational but sharp as a scalpel. A wire transfer originated from Maya's checking account, the specific account Brenda illegally hijacked using the forged medical proxy. The transfer was for exactly $5,000. The destination routing number matches your personal checking account at the regional credit union. The memo line on the transfer record reads, "Family Advance." The color drained from Sarah's face. She stumbled backward, bumping into the rolling tray table and dropping her expensive designer handbag to the floor. The exact same handbag she had just purchased using that stolen $5,000. Her mouth opened, but her vocal cords failed to produce a single sound. "Did Brenda act out of love when she paid you $5,000 of stolen money to stand in this room today?" Chloe asked, looking up from the binder to meet Sarah's terrified eyes. "Or was that just the required price for your solidarity?" The truth stripped the room bare. The family had not gathered out of spiritual concern or familial duty. They had gathered out of complicity. Brenda had distributed the early spoils of her impending financial conquest to buy their silence and guarantee their presence at the hearing. The reaction from the rest of the room was immediate, silent, and primal. The united wall of grieving relatives shattered like cheap glass. Uncle John, who had been holding his wife's hand moments ago, physically pulled his fingers away from hers and took 3 deliberate steps backward, pressing his spine against the cold plaster wall to distance himself from the fallout. The older cousins near the sink suddenly found the floor tiles incredibly interesting, burying their hands deep in their coat pockets and refusing to meet Brenda's panicked gaze. The heavy, suffocating silence in the room was no longer born of sorrow, but of terrified mental arithmetic. You could almost hear them frantically calculating their own exposure, wondering what other damning financial records Chloe had trapped inside that thick blue binder. The familial shield Brenda had bought and paid for dissolved into thin air. In the span of 30 seconds, she was utterly isolated, standing alone in the center of the sterile room as the people she had bribed retreated into their own cowardly shadows. The bailiff gripped Brenda's elbow again and guided her toward the door. The reality of the cold steel binding her wrists finally breached her panic. The performative grief vanished, replaced by raw, unadulterated terror. Her legs gave out. She dropped her dead weight toward the floor, forcing the officer to haul her up by her armpits. She twisted her neck, looking back at the bed. Tears streamed down her face, ruining the dark makeup she had carefully applied that morning to look exhausted and devoted. "Maya!" she screamed. The sound tore at her throat, guttural and ugly. "Maya, please, tell them to stop. I am your mother." "You cannot do this to me. I gave you life. You owe me." She fought the bailiff, her leather boots slipping on the polished tile. She strained toward me, her eyes wide and desperate, begging for the subservient, silent daughter she thought she had trained to always surrender. I sat upright against the pillows. I adjusted the hospital blanket over my legs with my left hand. I felt the pulse in my neck, slow and rhythmic. I looked at the woman who had spent 30 years leveraging her biological title to extract my compliance, who had tried to steal my future to settle her own debts. "You did not give me life," I said. My voice was low, carrying across the silent room without effort. "You tried to take it." Brenda stopped struggling. The words hit her like a physical blow to the chest. "You just stole the last piece of family we had," I told her, holding her terrified gaze until she was forced to look away. "Goodbye, Mother." The bailiff pulled her through the doorway. Her sobs echoed down the corridor, fading as they marched her toward the hospital elevators, leaving behind a room filled with quiet, terrified relatives and a daughter who finally owned her own breath. The fallout was swift and absolute. Facing undeniable state felony charges and a looming federal IRS investigation, Brenda took a blind plea deal, resulting in an 8-year sentence in a state correctional facility. The bank foreclosed on her house within a week. Dr. Sterling lost his medical license permanently and received a 5-year sentence for fraud, while Todd was disbarred and faced his own conspiracy charges. As for the relatives who stood in that hospital room, they received a single mass email from me, permanently severing all ties, followed by a lifetime of absolute silence. 30 days later, I left Riverside Hospital. The next morning, I woke up in my own apartment before the sun. The sky outside my window was a deep bruised purple, bleeding into a clean gray. I walked into the kitchen, relying less on my aluminum cane today. I poured hot water over fresh, dark roasted coffee beans, breathing in the rich, heavy scent. I carried my ceramic mug to the small wooden table near the window and opened my primary bank statement. The unauthorized medical proxy was permanently voided. The account was active and fully under my control. I picked up my coffee mug and took a slow sip. The hot liquid warmed my throat. I looked out the window, watching the morning traffic begin to move on the street below. I sat in my own chair in my own apartment, drinking coffee I bought with my own money. No one possessed a key to my front door. No one held a forged document claiming authority over my body. The architecture of my life belonged entirely to me. The small red recording indicator on the digital camera blinks in the dim light of my living room. I sit centered in the frame, looking directly into the dark glass of the lens. The story of my mother and the forged conservatorship reveals two harsh but necessary truths about toxic family dynamics. First, blood relation is not a protective shield against exploitation. Toxic relatives often believe that sharing DNA gives them the automatic right to drain your resources and dictate your future. They will use the illusion of a loving family to mask their own predatory behavior, and they will gladly buy the silence of other relatives to ensure their success. Second, when dealing with a manipulator, silence and preparation are your most lethal weapons. You cannot outscream someone who is willing to forge legal documents while you are bleeding in a hospital bed. The only way to stop them is to let them build their own cage on the official record. Emotional reactions give them power, but concrete, irrefutable evidence guarantees their destruction. If you have ever had to quietly dismantle a toxic family dynamic to save your own life, or if you have ever built an unbreakable boundary to protect your peace, hit the like button and subscribe to Sweet Life Drama. Drop a comment below and tell me your story, because your truth will always find a voice here. I will see you in the next one.